Stay tuned for the next edition of Zoom Landlord Tenant Talk Radio. The opening topic will be Maximize Your Rent Cash for Keys Strategy. Well, hello, everybody. Yes, another edition of Zoom Landlord Tenant Talk Radio coming at you, every Saturday at 3 p.m. If you're watching this broadcast live, the name of the song was Brown Eyed Girl, and that was performed by and written by Van Morrison, and it was released in 1967. Now, here's a little fact that you didn't know. The song was originally titled Brown Skinned Girl, and of course, Morrison wrote it to capture the sense of youthful romance and nostalgia. It was recorded actually in just 2 to 3 takes and, of course, became a monster hit. So that is the story behind Brown Eyed Girl, also known as Brown Skin Girl. Okay, let's talk about the show format. You know that we open it up to a topic to start that I will talk about. And then if you are in the Zoom meeting, we will open it up for questions and answers. If you are in the Zoom meeting, all you have to do if you want to talk to me is to electronically raise your hand. I would suggest doing that now if you can, so you'll be sure that you'll be called on, because I do take them in the order of the people that have raised their hands. And if you are watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. If you would just merely hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, because it really does help me. Okay, let's get into the topic at hand. And what is that topic? The topic is get maximum rent, cash for keys strategy. Now, many landlords are struggling with below market rents, or they're struggling because they want to sell their property and they have no way of having that tenant vacate. And of course, this is all due to the establishment of rent control. Residential housing providers are the only industry in the entire United States that has price controls. No other industry has this. And there are very important industries out there like producing baby formula and drugs, but yet all industries are not subject to price controls except for residential housing providers. Now, we know, and I've talked about this in the past, that rent control creates a shortage of housing and thereby makes higher rent in those jurisdictions. It's been proven so easily based on supply and demand that if you institute rent control, you're going to have higher rents. And that's just the thing. You can do statuses and surveys on this as they have, and you'll see that those jurisdictions that don't have rent control, their rents are on the average lower. So it's the politicians, of course, just running amok. Now, with regard to my topic, paying a tenant ransom in the form of a cash for keys agreement would seem to be repugnant. Yet it has been proven as an effective strategy in attaining your economic goals. So first of all, what is a cash for keys agreement? Well, it's a formal agreement between a landlord and a tenant where the tenant will voluntarily vacate the unit in exchange for consideration. It is perfectly legal to offer any tenant in the state of California money to vacate a unit. People think that that's against the law. It is not against the law. And what also you have to understand that there is no fixed amount under any jurisdiction as to what that relocation can be. There is no fixed amount. It could be $1 or it could be $150,000, but there is no fixed amount. It's what the parties agree. Now, what should a cash for keys, or as we call it in our office, a voluntary vacate agreement contain? Well, number one, it has to have the amount of relocation that will be given to the tenant, and also when that money will be given to the tenant. Will it be given upon the execution of the agreement? Will it be given half now and half when the tenant vacates? Or will it be given all when the tenant vacates? These are the terms of the agreement that you have to negotiate with your tenant. and then make sure that they're included in the agreement. Now, also, you have to state that since the tenant is going to have time to move, will rent have to be paid to the landlord during this period? That's something that needs to be negotiated. And last but not least, will the tenant be entitled to his itemization for his security deposit? So these are the terms, the basic terms that have to go into any kind of a voluntary vacate or cash for keys agreement when you're negotiating with your tenant. Now remember, you don't have to deal with a cash for keys agreement or a voluntary vacate and pay somebody relocation money if your property is exempt from rent control. Okay. And I've said this many times in this broadcast that if you have a single family residence with only one house on the lot, or you own a townhouse, or you own a condominium, you are not subject to rent limitations. I don't care how long the tenant's been there. I don't care whether, in fact, you're a corporation or a REIT. It makes no difference. You have the right to raise the rent to market level as long as that tenant didn't live in that unit prior to 1996, then there would be an exception. But if he's lived in that unit from 1996 forward in time, there are no limitations in terms of what you can ask for rent. So you don't care about a voluntary vacate agreement in those situations. Okay. However, if your property is subject to a local rent control or a statewide rent control, then your options are to try to get higher rent. Well, one option is not that you want to pretend to have a family member move in or that you want to move in. A lot of landlords think, well, I'll just say I'm moving in and the tenant will have to move out. Maybe I'll stay there a couple of weeks and then I will I'll be able to raise the rent to market value. That plan doesn't work, okay? Many jurisdictions like Los Angeles require that you stay there for 2 years. The state of California requires, if you're under statewide rent control, that you stay there for 1 year. But like in California, excuse me, like in the city of Los Angeles, when you move out after 2 years, you can't raise the rent to market value. You have to keep the same rent as what that original tenant was paying, plus any applicable increases that the city allowed for 2 years. So that is not an effective strategy to raise the rent. Also, if you really don't move in or you stay for a short period of time and move out, guess what? You're going to be subjecting yourself to a lawsuit. These people will come back, they'll see what you did, they're going to sue you for wrongful eviction, and you're going to be in a whole world of pain when that happens. So you certainly don't want to use that as a reason if you're trying to get higher rent. Stating that you're moving in or a family member moving in is not going to work. And of course, in the city of Los Angeles and in most other municipalities, they have this last in, first out rule, which means that you can't take the oldest tenant who's paying the least amount of rent. You have to take the newest tenant, last in, first out. You'd have to take the newest tenant who's obviously paying market rent. So there's no economic incentive for you to use the strategy, oh, well, I'll just move in. You've got to do it in the form of a voluntary vacate agreement. Now, how can cash for keys help you attain market value? Well, and I've said this before, I have a deal for everybody listening to this broadcast. So here's this offer, which you guys are going to think is insane, but I'm offering this deal. And that is anybody listening to me, if you give me $30,000, I promise, and it is guaranteed, you will get this. I will give you $1,500 for the rest of your life. Once again, you give me $30,000. This is my offer to everybody listening. And guaranteed, I will give you $1,500 per month for the rest of your life. Now, I would submit that if you had any basics in economics, that you would accept that deal. Well, I don't have that deal. And I'm just using that as way of an illustration because you might have that deal. And with that, I'm going to share my screen and I want to show you what's going on here. And there we go. Okay, so here's the formula to achieve market rent. Let's pretend the market value of your unit is $2,500. But this tenant who's been there for forever is only paying $1,000. So what does that mean? It means that you're losing $1,500 a month, right? $1,500 a month. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up to the next screen, which is this one. And that is if you use an effective voluntary vacate agreement, a buyout agreement, and you pay that tenant just what I was asking for, $30,000, this is what's going to happen. Number one, once that tenant moves out and you're now getting an additional $1,500 per month, you're going to get your $30,000 recouped, reimbursed to you in 20 months. In 20 months, you got your money back. And then from that point in time, you're going to make $1,500 more per month for the rest of your life. $1,500 a month more for the rest of your life. But it goes beyond that. Most people, when they're evaluating the price of a building, do use the gross multiplier, and that gross multiplier is 17. So what does that mean? That means that you take the gross rent that you're getting for the entire year and multiply that times 17, maybe 16, maybe 18, depending on the area, and that determines the value of your building. Well, if I have an additional $1,500 in rent in 1 year, that amounts to $18,000. And $18,000 times the gross multiplier of 17 works out to be $306,000 that you've added to the value of your building. That is $306,000 that you've added into the value of your building. So it is a very effective strategy if you have a low-paying tenant. And again, that was just my example. You pay me $30,000 and I'm going to give you $1,500 per month for the rest of your life guaranteed. Well, you know, if you have a tenant who's $1,500 below market value, you know you're going to get $1,500 because you know the value of your building. You also know how much more money that will add to the value of your building in terms of sales. Now, how do you negotiate a successful agreement with your tenant who's paying very low rent? Now, if you really did have a family member that you're considering moving into that unit, or for example, you're in a jurisdiction where you're allowed to ask a tenant to move because you want to renovate the unit, or for example, you're in a jurisdiction where you want to permanently remove that unit from rental housing use. You want to demolish the property and build something new. If you did really have that as an intent, you could go over to your tenant and kind of make the following deal. And that is, for example, in the city of Los Angeles, it could be as much as $25,700 to put in a family member. If you go, but again, if that family member moves out, we know we can't raise the rent in the city of Los Angeles, so it's not a very effective strategy. But if you really did have a family member who's contemplating moving in, you could go to that tenant and say, listen, my family member's moving in. You're going to be entitled to the maximum in the city of Los Angeles, though there's lesser amounts depending on whether it's a qualified tenant or not. But the maximum would be $25,700. So you'd be entitled, Mr. Tenant, to $25,700 because I want my grandchild to move in, and you're entitled to a 60-day notice. But I know you've been in my building for a long time, and I do feel bad about making you move. So I'll tell you what, instead of the $25,700, I'll give you $30,000 and I'll give you 90 days to move. Now, if you don't take it, that's okay. Then we're just going to go the formal route with the city and I'll only give you 60 days and 25,700. So that's your decision, Mr. Tenant. Now, of course, we want him to take the voluntary vacate agreement, even though we're paying more money and giving him more time, because then you're free to re-rent the premises any way you like. If your family member decides not to move in, then you have the right to, because it's a voluntary vacate agreement, and under the law, you can charge whatever you like to the next tenant coming in. Now, I have a story, a personal story to tell regarding a duplex that was family owned, not me personally, but owned by my in-laws. And that building was located near La Cienega and Melrose. And this was a duplex. And they were getting incredibly low rent. The top part of the duplex was getting $1,250. The bottom part of the duplex was $995 in a very, very nice neighborhood. Each one had 2 bedrooms. Well, as luck would have it, the top floor tenant decided to move voluntarily, no questions asked. So I thought it was time that I would tell the bottom tenant, offer to move. And we were planning, because on this block, there were many apartments being demolished to put up condos. And we were considering that. And I went to the bottom tenant and said, look, we're considering doing a demolition to this property and building condos here because it's a long lot and it would support that, as you can see what's going on in the block. I said, but I would prefer to give you more money. You're entitled to a 60-day notice, and at the time it was $24,000. But I would prefer not to have to go through all the work with the city, that if you just voluntarily agreed to move. And we negotiated it, and believe it or not, we negotiated it, and he moved for $37,000. It seems like a lot of money, doesn't it? $37,000. But then once the tenant was out, and we realized that building condos was going to be too much of an expensive proposition, we changed our minds. And what we did was we renovated the place. Now, we spent a lot of money renovating this place, every surface. We actually added an additional bathroom for each of those units. And we demolished the garage and put up a brand new garage. Right now, we are getting for each unit $5,500 per month. And remember, the bottom floor was paying $995 and the top floor was paying $1,250. The return on that $37,000 is unbelievable. It's immeasurable. So that's a story that, as a personal story, using a cash for keys agreement, or as we like to call it, a voluntary vacate agreement, that brought in a lot more revenue for my family. Also, if you're planning on selling, let's say a house, that's not a ground to ask someone to move. So you're kind of stuck in, for example, the city of Los Angeles, and in some cases in the state of California under statewide rent control, you can't ask the tenant to move. Well, you can try this discussion with the tenant saying, listen, I am planning on selling this property. And whoever's going to buy it is going to ask you to move. And under, for example, statewide rent control, it's 1 month's rent and a 60-day notice. But you know what? I would prefer that you move before we sell it. So on that basis, I'm willing to give you, and then you make up a figure, 5,000, 10,000, because once that tenant moves, you will sell the property. But obviously, as every real estate broker knows, the property is going to sell for a much higher amount if it's not tenant occupied. So that's another strategy, by telling him that the purchaser will be moving in. You're going to have to move anyway. Why not take more money now? Now, let's move on to statewide rent control. Under statewide rent control, you're entitled right now to an 8.9% rent increase. If that makes you market value or close to market value, you don't need to deal with a voluntary vacate agreement, okay? Also under statewide rent control, you have the option of using the renovation issue, where you're going to do major renovation to that unit, which will take more than 30 days to complete. It'll render the premises uninhabitable for 30 days. and requires that you obtain a building permit. That's a good strategy if you have a statewide rent control tenant to ask that tenant to move on the basis that you're doing major renovation. Okay, so you don't have to deal with a voluntary vacate agreement, but you are going to have to do the work. You are going to have to do to get the building permits. So if you're sitting there and you really don't want to do the renovation, you can do the same type of offer saying, look, you're going to have to move. You're entitled to 1 month's rent because we are renovating this property. But if you agree to a voluntary vacate agreement, I'll give you more money and more time. And then you can make a decision whether you really want to do the renovation or not. Also under statewide rent control, if they sign this agreement and then choose not to move, that is a ground under statewide rent control for you to evict that tenant. Let's move on now to the city of Los Angeles. The city of Los Angeles has specific rules dealing with voluntary vacate agreements. I'm going to share my screen again. And here we go. They require that you give the tenant a disclosure form, and that disclosure form must be signed by your tenant prior to even entering into any discussions regarding voluntary vacate. So here's the agreement. I'll kind of scroll down, and it tells the tenant all that they need to know. They have to sign this, and then this ultimately will get filed with the city with the enclosed agreement. Now, this agreement also states that when you do a voluntary vacate agreement, you have to tell the tenant that there's a 30-day cooling off period. A 30-day cooling off period. You have to have the language in your voluntary vacate agreement that states, you, Mr. Tenant, may cancel this buyout agreement anytime up to 30 days after all parties have signed this agreement without any obligation or penalty. And then again, it's filed with the city with a copy of the voluntary vacate agreement. Now, that form, if you look at that form, states on it specific amounts of relocation. And that just confuses everybody because, again, there is no specific amount that you have to offer the tenant. So even though it kind of lends itself on that agreement to specific amounts, it's really just misleading to everyone. If I want to offer a tenant to move a ticket to Disneyland, if he accepts it, that's a good agreement. Now, here comes the kicker. If you do a proper Los Angeles voluntary vacate agreement, you had him sign the disclosures, and based on your agreement, you gave him all the money up front, and he agreed to move by a specific date. And then he doesn't. Well, one would logically think that you'd then be able to immediately start an eviction. He signed the agreement, he signed the disclosure. I even filed that with the city. Everyone knows he has to move. He took my money, he cashed the check. But you know, in the city of Los Angeles, they have 12 reasons to evict, and that's not one of them. That is not one of them. That you took the money, you agreed to move, and then you didn't. It is grounds for eviction under statewide rent control, but it's not grounds for eviction under the city of Los Angeles and other municipalities. So how do you get around it? Well, that's why we created our voluntary vacate agreement. So let me explain how this works. And anybody can copy the idea, or you could possibly retain my firm. But this is the way it works. Our voluntary vacate agreement states that it's a voluntary vacate agreement addendum to rental agreement. So it actually becomes an addendum to the rental agreement. And this agreement then states exactly how much how much relocation they're going to get and when they're supposed to get out, etc. But it also states that the price, though this is not the price, of preparing a voluntary vacate agreement with an attorney is $2,000. But that's going to be paid by the landlord. But the agreement goes on to state that if the tenant doesn't vacate when he says he's going to vacate, then he has to pay the attorney fee, which in this case, for example, would be $2,000. He also has to give back all the relocation money. But you see, by making this an addendum to the rental agreement, I can now serve a 3-day notice to perform or quit, giving him 3 days to give me the reimbursement for the attorney's fees and give me back any money that I prepaid prior to the move out. If he doesn't pay, that's going to be grounds for eviction. That's why a simple buyout agreement generally doesn't work, because you can't rely upon the tenant doing what he says he's going to do. Also, other jurisdictions also have this, which requirement of disclosure forms, and that would be unincorporated areas of LA County, Culver City, Santa Monica, West Hollywood, and a jurisdiction coming close to you. So make sure that you know the rules for the jurisdiction. But you know what? Take a look at the rents for your building, see which ones are low, see which one makes sense to offer them money to move. But if you can get them to move, what did you just do? You made a lifetime of additional income for yourself, and you just raised the value of your building exponentially. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the topic of the day, which is get maximum rents, cash for keys strategy. Now we're going to open it up to questions and answers, and we know the rules. This broadcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for legal advice. If you do want to talk to me, electronically raise your hand, and in the order that you raise your hand, I will be calling on you. This broadcast is for general questions only. If you do have a case with my office, God bless you, but call me at the office, because I'll talk to you that specifically, not on air. And last but not least, if you are talking to me and if you have a camera, leave it on, because it makes it much more enjoyable for the public to see and for me to see. And last, if guys in the YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. And now we're going to open it up to the first person, our co-host, I'm going to call him that, and that would be Jim Polina.
Hey, Dennis. Good to see you.
And good to see you, sir.
Well, that's Morro Bay, by the way, behind me, Morro Rock. So at any rate, after an unlawful detainer action and a successful eviction, do all rent controls get wiped off and I can reset the rent?
That generally is the case. There is one exception that no one knows about, and please don't tell this to any tenants' attorneys, and that is if you're evicting for nuisance in the city of Los Angeles, they specifically state that you cannot raise the rent.
Wow, amazing. Okay, another question. And this is currently, I have a tenant signed a 12-month lease, gave a 60-day notice to move out on month 11, not month 12. And they moved out 45 days after giving notice, so short of the 60 days. Do I owe them rent for the remaining do they have to pay rent for the remaining 15 days?
And the answer is yes. If you served a 60-day notice, they have to pay rent to the expiration of that notice. So if they move out earlier, then technically they do owe that rent, and you can deduct that from the security deposit. Of course, let's pretend that the day they moved out, you were fortunate enough to rent the premises to somebody else. Then their liability would end at that point.
But if I don't rent it out, are they still liable for that last month?
They are still liable for the last month, though the law does state that you have to mitigate your tenant's damages by trying to lease it in the shortest possible time.
Right. So Dennis, I do have one more question, if I may. It's this idea of cleanliness, returning the premise to the same state received versus wear and tear above normal amount. It seems like that's a very nuanced perspective.
Well, I think you're stating it incorrectly. You're not allowed, you don't have to return it to the state where it was originally leased to them. The tenant is allowed to leave the premises without any damages being assessed to him if there is reasonable wear and tear. Everything is going to have reasonable wear and tear. The carpeting is going to wear out after 20, 30 years. There are going to be holes in the walls because everybody puts up pictures, so that's reasonable wear and tear. It's the unreasonable wear and tear is what you're allowed to deduct from a security deposit.
So if I have to clean, do additional cleaning to meet my standard, then I cannot charge them for that?
Well, there's a difference between unusual wear and tear and cleaning. You are always allowed to charge for your actual and reasonable cleaning charges. That's an item that you can deduct for from the security deposit, in addition to unusual wear and tear, and of course, any rent owed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good question, sir. Okay, let's move on to Jonathan Kennedy. How are you?
Well, thank you, Dennis. I have a question about the TPA Act. If a tenant never received the notice that they are entitled to, that their tenant or that their property is not subject to the Tenant Protection Act, that do, that doesn't mean you can't serve it, and then they are subject to it, correct?
And the answer is no. So if a tenant moved in after November 2020, that phrase that the premises were exempt from statewide rent control, you're calling that TPA, standing for the Tenant Protection Act for the other listeners, then that property is subject to statewide rent control, which means you have to have good cause to evict. However, whether that phrase is there or not, as I have said many times, if it's a condo, single family home, or a townhouse, then you're not subject to rent limitations, but you would be subject to good cause to evict.
Okay, um, so whether they receive the notice or not, you can raise the rent.
Always, you can always raise the rent if it's a single family home, townhouse, or a condominium. Now, if you didn't have that in the agreement that you entered into, the exemption clause that this property is exempt from statewide rent control because maybe it's property that's 15 years or newer, again, single family home, townhouse, or condo, you
Let me
could
just
get them to.
interject that they moved into this property in 2017, which was 2 or 3 years before
Okay,
the.
so for that, then you can serve them with a notice that this property is exempt from statewide rent control. You can do that right now. That form is on my website at
Right,
evict123.com.
right, right.
But again,
Okay,
if
and
you did enter it in before, for the rest of the audience, if you did lease the property after and you didn't have that exemption, the only way you could get that exemption would be to have the tenant sign a new rental agreement, which shows that exemption.
so like if you renewed a lease, if they agreed to renew a lease, sign a whole new lease, you put the exemption in the new lease, that would be legit.
Yes, then you're fine in that
Okay,
situation. However,
okay,
since your lease was negotiated prior to November 2020, then all you got to do is serve the notice of statewide exemption.
okay. Now, a kind of a related question. This emergency uh, rent gouging thing that's going to expire on July 1st, is it?
July
Is that
6th.
what, July 6th? Okay. Um, you can you, like, if you want to raise the rent more than 10%, do you have to wait to July 6th to give them the notice? Or can you give them the notice now? And because it's going to be 90 days before it's effective, and that'll be after July 6th, right?
That's an excellent question, and I have struggled with that question. And our firm takes the position that as long as the rent increase doesn't take effect uh, July 6th or prior, that you're okay. So right now, if you're going to raise the rent more than 10%, that rent increase wouldn't take effect, believe it or not, until September 1.
I think the counter argument would be you don't know if that emergency declaration is going to expire because it could be extended.
Anything can happen, but then if that's the case, then you wouldn't be able to increase the rent. You'd have to withdraw your rent increase. That's all.
And that's all you would do. You would just withdraw it. There's no
Yeah.
implications. No, you're not going to be penalized in any way, correct?
I don't think you'd be penalized in any way.
Okay, I just don't want to be, sawing off the branch I'm sitting on. You know what I mean?
I can picture that. Anyway, thank you very much. We're going to move on to Aaron. How are you?
Hi, Mr. Block. Thank you
Yep.
very much for what you do. I'm a longtime client. You guys helped me with an eviction about 3 years ago, which went real smooth. Unfortunately, this is my first time calling, and that's because I teach at your alma mater and at CSUN. I know that's where you did your undergrad. You told me once we met, and I can't call in during this time, but I made arrangements for today. So two quick questions, sir. First one, in your last recording, you've talked about the just cause ordinance, the new fantastic thing that we're stuck with. Do you know how they go about sending these letters out? And I ask because I've got two rentals, single family, and I received one letter for each one. And then the place I live in with my family, we even got one for that, which I know I could take the exemption, but how do they go about doing these?
My understanding, and it was written that the way they sent out these notices was that if where the tax bill is sent to a different address than where the property is located, then they assume that you are renting it. And on that basis, you would have to register your unit or apply for the exemption. So they weren't renting it. They weren't sending out these exemption forms to owners that had the same tax address where the property was. Maybe in your case, they're doing it because you've got multiple units. So they just said, okay, then for you, Aaron, we're going to send it out to everybody. But this is such an imposition on the public where, for example, my mother-in-law owns a house that her daughter, my sister-in-law, lives in, and we had to file an exemption. The exemption requires that we have it notarized. So what a boondoggle that they're forcing innocent property owners not only to have to set up an account with the city, fill out the form for exemption, and then send it in. And also, of course, if your property is rented, why is the city taking this money in the first place? And the answer to that is very simple. It's just a money grab by Karen Bass and the other malcontents that run our city.
Yeah, I'm disgusted, but thank you for that. If I may ask one other quick question, I hope I haven't done something wrong. And about 6, 7 years ago, we met up and talked about this condo on White Oak, the place that's turning into a dump every day.
The one right
Yeah.
by the freeway?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I know it well. I've done maybe about 90 evictions in my career in that one condominium complex.
I remember you pulled it up when we were in your office and there was line after line with that address. So I have a tenant, elderly lady who's been there about 10 and a half years, always pays on time. But I mean, the issues we have there is crazy, and you may have heard about all that stuff. I reached out to her and I said, listen, are you interested in buying this unit from me? And I'll give you a really good deal, dot, dot, dot. And her son has shown interest. And that's under RSO, and for years we've been paying the $27, $30, whatever the dollar amount keeps
Right,
going
but you
up.
do know you're not subject to rent limitations.
Yes, yes. My the gentleman who sort of manages the unit for me, we showed up together to talk to you about that, and he's reminded me. I just want to let it go. I'm sick and tired of that area. So if I sell to the son, do I have to let the city know that now I'm selling it, or I sell it if they go through the process? I
No,
haven't.
it's the owner's job to have the premises registered into the new owner's name. It's not your job. You just sell it and walk away and don't ever pay another registration fee.
Okay, all right. Yeah, they've shown interest. I'm giving them a crazy deal just because I'm sick and tired of it, and every day City of LA pisses me off. But okay, thank you very much. You answered both my questions.
I got a
Appreciate
question for you, youngster.
it. Youngster, thank you.
You say you teach at Northridge. What do you teach?
I teach mechanical engineering and I'm celebrating my 29th year, believe it or not.
Well, then you're a really smart guy, not like us.
Oh, no, 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 no. Thank you for that. But no, if I was smart, I wouldn't have bought stuff in the city of LA, but who knows what's going to happen.
I can only tell you that I'm pretty good with computers, but I can't even hang a picture. So,
Well, call on me. My son is a general contractor. I'll have him come and do it for free.
thank you. Appreciate that. We are moving on to someone who claims to be iPhone. If you could unmute yourself. Mr. iPhone, are you there? Okay, I think we lost you.
Hello?
Oh,
Hello?
there you go.
Oh, hi. Hi, Dennis.
Hey, how are you?
How are you? Thank you for everything. Um, I have a question. It's in regards to rent increase for the LA County. Can the old percentage increase be increased? So it's 4%, and the notice was given back in late November 2024. Will that be effective for January 25, despite the new year having a new percentage, which is now 3.5%?
You have 1 year. If you gave a lawful rent increase in November 2024, then that increase sticks until October 31st of 2025.
So it would be effective for January 25?
Yeah, I mean, you gave a lawful increase in November of 2024, correct?
Yeah, that was the
And
notice
that
was,
increase, that's a lawful increase. It doesn't matter that now the city has a new amount. That just means that when your year expires and now on November 1st, 2025, you want to do a new rent increase. Well, it's based on what the new amount is by the city.
okay, got it.
Thank you. Good question.
All right, thank you.
Moving along to my little New York friend, Janice. How are you?
Good, Dennis. How are you? Thanks for
I,
doing this.
my pleasure, darling.
I just got a text from a California friend of mine that said that the legislature once again declined to pass a law to deal with the squatting problem due to the fact that it would exacerbate the homelessness problem. I fail to see what those two things have to do with each other or why landlords should be responsible. But is there a law in California that the local sheriff or police have to allow landlords to write them a letter that's good for a year? Should there be a squatting problem so that they can remove the squatters, or did that go away? Because I got pushback on that from the local police when I raised that a couple years ago after I found a squatter in my garage.
Okay, there is a law in the books. And in fact, if you go to my website, evict123.com, click on the legal issues gray button and scroll down. There's a form dealing with trespassers. You fill that form out and then you give it to the local police department. This is for those cases, for everybody listening to this, where you have a vacant unit and somebody just jumps into the unit and you call the police and then they're going to say it's a civil matter and you got to go through a type of an eviction called a forcible detainer. However, if you are under the understanding that I have a vacant unit and I want to make sure that if someone jumps in that I will have the assistance of the local police department, you fill out this form, it's on my website, you deliver it to that local police department, you put a sign on your property saying no trespassing. If
Yeah.
in fact somebody jumps in, then the police would be duty bound to rip those people out of that unit.
Okay, because they're saying, last time I asked them about this about a year ago, they said, we're not doing that.
Well, you know what? Police don't necessarily know the law. However,
Yeah.
if you go up the ranks, I mean, it's on the books, and if you filed that paper first with the police department, then you're fine.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay. And now we're moving on to Sonia. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, Dennis. Hi, thank you. Sorry, I can't have my video on. But my question has to do with the itemization of the security deposit. So we had a tenant move out, but so my understanding, anything over $126, we should include a receipt. Um,
125 or higher, then you have to include the receipts.
okay. Now, is that for each item? Because a tenant left and did not clean the floors, the house. So we are going to have to do some deep cleaning because they did have some pets, and we could see kind of like maybe some stains and around the window. So between that and blinds and other things, do we have to do that just for every item, or just the ones that are 125?
No, it's cumulative. So whatever totals $125, then you're going to have to supply all the receipts for that. So if the cleaning was, let's say, $100 and they had a broken window that was also $110, you're way over 125.
So for each one, we have to give some itemization for that.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
All right. You have a good weekend. Moving on to Thomas Joe. How are you?
Hi, Dennis. Hey, I have to first and foremost say I'm brand new to the group and I'm blown away and utterly appreciative that you are doing this. It's so cool. I've been going back each day and watching your YouTube stuff, and I'm so excited. I tried to ask a question last week and didn't make it on. So thank you so much for calling on me, and thank you so, so much for doing this. It's really amazing. Um, I do have a question or two for you quickly. So I have an empty 3-bedroom single family home here in the city of Los Angeles in North Hollywood. And with this new obnoxious GCO law rule, if you're a natural person that owns the home and need to relocate a tenant for a no fault or at fault eviction, then you pay only 1 month rent for relocation assistance. If, though, you are the only member of an LLC that owns the same 3-bedroom single family home, depending upon the tenants, of course, you could potentially have to pay tens of thousands of dollars
No, if it's an
for
LLC and an
relocation fee.
individual
Like,
is, if it's an LLC, a limited liability company, and the member of that LLC is an individual, it's still only 1 month's rent. If the member of the LLC, or if at least one of the members of that LLC is a corporation, then you're facing higher amounts.
okay, I should say this though. I own more than 4 properties in the city of Los Angeles. Each of them have their own LLC, but I think there was some stipulation that if you own more than 4, then it doesn't count or something. Doesn't it say that? It says something like,
No, I'm not aware of that. That deals with another issue in terms of, I know, like security deposits, that whether you can get a double security deposit or not.
it says in the relocation. Oh, so sorry. It says in the relocation assistance under the renter's notification that you have to post at the home. It says under relocation assistance for tenants who rent a single family dwelling is 1 month rent if the landlord is a natural person who owns no more than 4 residential units on a separate lot.
Okay, but if an LLC, you can't be asking a tenant to move because you want to move in. Well, why do you want the tenant to move?
No, I'm so sorry. I don't yet have a tenant in there. I was wondering, my question for you was going to be, and I think you're answering it without my realizing it, but what I was basically getting at is before I have a tenant move in, does it behoove me to pull the property out of an LLC and put it into my name so that I am a natural person, so as to only have to pay 1 month's rent should they have to leave? Or does it behoove me to keep it in the LLC for,
Well, if it's in an LLC, then you
Mhm.
can't ask a tenant to move, period, because an LLC doesn't have any, is not a person and doesn't have any relatives. So that's why the question's a little bit off.
Oh,
Only a natural person can state that, hey, I want to move in to my unit, or I want my grandchild to move in. An LLC doesn't have a grandchild.
I see. So those are the only circumstances where you would have to do relocation. If it's an at-fault eviction, you
Right.
don't have to pay that relocation fee?
No, I mean, well, you're saying at fault, this is a non-fault eviction if you want a family member to move in. But again, you have to own at least 50% if you want a family member. An individual has to own 50% of the property if you want to move a family member in, or 25% of the property if they want to move in themselves. Otherwise, we don't get to relocation because you don't have the right to ask them to move in the first place.
Okay, I hear you. All right, thank you for that last question, and thank you. Okay. Again, under this new GCO, so there was something that was about like basically, it seemed to me that from like shorthand on this, that Karen Bass and friends were basically saying, hey, you know what? If a tenant doesn't want to pay $3,334 if it's a 3-bedroom, then they don't have to. Like basically, if the rent for the sake of this conversation is on a 3-bedroom is $6,335, then in January they could turn around and hand you rent of $3,000 only and go, yeah, we're not paying you that additional $3,335, and you can't make us move because we haven't paid rent.
On what basis? I'm not following that.
There's a thing in here that says the economic threshold fair market rent per bedroom size that effective March 27, 2023,
Okay,
landlords.
you're looking at that incorrectly. What
Okay.
that talks about is that if you have a property that is not subject to rent limitations, and by the way, this is just a totally illegal law passed by the city of Los Angeles. So let's pretend I have a house, and the house is, let's pretend going for $4,000 a month. If I serve that tenant with a rent increase notice that exceeds 8.9%, that tenant has two options. He can either pay it because he legally has to, or he can say, you know what, that amount is too much money, and therefore I want my relocation. And he's entitled to relocation money in that situation. 1 month for a house, but if it's an apartment or a condominium, it goes up from like, I don't know, $10,000 up to $20,000 for the privilege of legally being able to raise your rent.
Yeah, that's right. But there was something also about evictions for non-payment of rent that
Well,
you
again,
can't.
and then I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
If you have a situation where I have a 1-bedroom unit and the rent is $2,000 per month, then the city of Los Angeles says that you cannot serve a 3-day notice, even though he owes you $2,000 for the month of May, because you don't meet the threshold. The threshold for a 1-bedroom apartment is $2,081. So you'd have to wait to month 2 in order to serve that. Okay, we're going to move on to Vici, my Italian friend. How are you?
Hi, thank you for picking me. I thought maybe you were going to close the session. Anyways, I just wanted to get to my question quickly. I have a single family home that was my home, and I rented it out in September of 22. It's in Riverside, California. I moved to Ventura. They have 1 dog on the lease, and I found out in December they now have 5 dogs, which I was told they were going to get rid of, and they have not. So I need to know, what are my options as far as pet rent, which I don't think I can charge. I've never increased their rent, and I want to know how much I can increase their rent. If I decide to move back in, do I have to stay for a full year?
Okay, you have all sorts of opportunities. Number one, you can start an eviction based on the fact that they're not only violating the terms of the rental agreement, but most jurisdictions have a limitation on zoning rules of how many dogs can occupy that property, and usually that's 3. So
4 in Riverside.
Is it 4? Okay, well then I guess, are they in excess of 4 at this point?
They have 5. Yeah.
Okay, so I would just go on the basis that they violated their rental agreement. I would serve them with a 3-day notice. Now, you talked about pet rent. There is no such thing as pet rent, but since this is a single family home, assuming they're on a month-to-month tenancy, you have the right to raise the rent to whatever you like. So you could just give $1,000 rent increase or a $2,000 rent increase. So that would be an option. If you do want to move in and ask them to move for that reason, and I don't even know why you'd go down that rabbit hole, you do have to stay there for at least 1 year under statewide rent control.
Okay,
Now,
that's
did you
good to
have
know.
the exemption in the rental agreement that said this property is exempt from statewide rent control?
I don't know. I'm going to have to. It was originally done with the property management, and then I got tired of paying them after 1 year because, anyways, I got rid of them, and I just started having them giving me pre-dated checks for 1 year that I'm depositing every month.
Right.
But I think I'm
Now,
going to go
if you
ahead.
did want to just get rid of them, assuming that box is checked in your rental agreement that states something to the effect of this property is exempt from statewide rent control, if they included that, then you don't need any reason. You can serve a 60-day notice or a 30-day notice to get out, assuming they're on a month-to-month tenancy. Anyway,
I'm
thank
thinking
you
about.
very much. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm considering moving to Mexico myself. So that's why I'm thinking about getting property management company and then just increasing their rent for sure. I've never increased their rent since September in 22. But maybe if I have no limit, That's an option. I thought it was 10%, but I guess I got that wrong.
No, I've said it multiple times, including on this show. A single family home, a townhouse, or a condominium, you're not subject to any rent limitations. And with
Okay.
that, we are going to move on to Harold Rhodes. How's that pool today?
Harold's doing good. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, so I was telling you last week that my tenant, I gave him the notice. He didn't want to pay the additional, and he said he wanted to see the bills. I haven't seen him all week, and so then he sends me the money through my bank, and I haven't even answered him because it just happened. But here's the question: I'm wondering, it all centers around the cables, like $250 a month. If he doesn't pay the extra money, can I just say, look, I want to turn off the cable, or would that be construed as
Well,
hostile to me?
first of all, is the cable a separate charge? You have it under a separate agreement that he pays for the cable?
No, it just when he moved in, the cable already had the cable.
Okay, but in the rental agreement, it's not separated like the rent is 2,000 and you're paying $250 for the cable.
Not even mentioned.
Okay, so then you can't turn off utilities. If he's not paying the full amount of rent, which is what you're telling me,
Yeah.
then he's paying only a partial rent. So therefore, you can serve a 3-day notice. I wouldn't take the partial payment, say you pay me the full amount of rent. This way he'll be above the threshold and then you'll be able to evict.
But here's the other, real quick, instead of evicting, is it possible I can accept that amount and not the extra amount that he doesn't want to pay, and then maybe a few months later take him to small claims court?
Absolutely. That is certainly an option. Thank you very much. We are moving on to, if I can read this, Norton Griffiths or Giffis. Norton, are you there? Okay, I'll take that as a no. We're going to move on to Jan Fern, 2929. Say hello.
Hi, Dennis.
Hello.
I have a duplex that I live on in Long Beach, and I have a tenant that seems to be it's problematic. They've clogged the garbage disposal twice already in the first year they've been here. I've gone in and unclogged it. The second time when I went in to unclog it, I noticed that the conditions of the home, they're letting water run off the sink and into the cabinets, and the cabinets are now warped. So my question to you is, I don't have a periodic inspection of the unit. Do I have to add that to the contract, or can I just request to go in to inspect the unit on a quarterly basis?
You can certainly request that, but they generally, unless you have something in your rental agreement that allows for periodic inspections, that's not a reason to go into a unit. You might say that maintenance of the unit, which you're allowed to do, like to check smoke detectors, you can do that. But let's go back to the warping of the cabinets. I can picture a sink. I can picture a cabinet. How is the water getting to the cabinet?
They have this dish rack that they hang the dishes on, and the water just runs off the counter and down into the faces of the cabinet.
Okay, so they are responsible. That seems like unusual wear and tear. They're responsible for that. Have you warned them not to do that?
I did.
Okay, well, they're going to be responsible. You'd be able to deduct that from the security deposit.
Okay, so the damage already looks like it's beyond the security deposit. So my question is, like, do I just
Are you interested in getting rid of these people? What's your motivation?
I think it's kind of started going that way.
If that's the case, then depending on your rental agreement, you can either fix the cabinets and then present them with the bill. If they don't pay it, then that would be a violation of their rental agreement if they didn't reimburse you. And we could take that one to court.
Okay, sounds great.
All right, thank you. We're moving on to David Kozravi. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Thank you so much, Dennis. Quick question. For City of Los Angeles, can you have a separate parking agreement?
You certainly can. I have that parking agreement on my website in the free form section. So you can rent out the unit, for example, for $2,000 and the parking for $200. So it's a total of $2,200, which is what you're looking for. But you have two separate rental agreements. And that means that for the parking, you can raise it whenever you want, because that would be considered a commercial rental agreement. Or conversely, you can just serve a 30-day notice to get rid of the parking. So either way, it gives landlords more power in the relationship if they do it in a second agreement.
And does it matter if you collect two separate deposits or if they're paid as one payment? Is that going to be a problem?
As long as you have two agreements stating each one that it's a separate agreement, you can take it all in one payment. They can pay it any way they like.
And is for RSO properties in city of LA, the maximum is 4% increase. Is that correct to date?
To date, it's 4% through June of 2025.
Okay, and then for one last question, City of Los Angeles, do you have to give them, can you give them a 3-day notice to evict, or you have to give them 3 days and then another 30 days or something you mentioned last time?
It's a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. The exception would be if in your building it's financed by a federal loan, or if any tenant in the building is under Section 8, then you need to serve a 3-day notice to pay or 30-day notice to quit. But unless those two items exist, one or the other, then it's just a standard 3-day notice.
Got it. Also, can I mention something to everybody who's listening? I just had a tenant of mine, or not a tenant, a client of mine, bring me a notice from the fair housing. They had testers that called everybody to see if they accept Section 8 or, just ask them questions. And they caught my friend saying that, no, they don't take Section 8, and now they're finding them. So just want to let you know that there are people out there from the government that are testing and just texting or calling people and asking those questions. And this was back in 2023, November of 23, that they were doing it, and now they're finding it. So I guess everybody just needs to.
We've been hearing that where they're setting up landlords, asking them, do you take Section 8 in the land? If the landlord says no, you're going to get sued. Hey, David, aren't you going into property management?
I'm already doing that, yes.
So I want you to know I personally know David, and he's really great, and I do recommend his service. And David, why don't you tell your phone number, and I'll also put it in the show notes. Everybody who needs any potential property management, this is a recommendation by my law firm to David. What's your phone number for everybody?
Is 818-292-3932.
Okay, I'll have it in the show notes and you can replay this. Anyway, thank you very much, David. We have reached the end of our show. Thank you, all of you, for coming and participating, because it does make it go well. Also, if you are watching on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. I want everybody to have a great weekend, and you'll all notice that I didn't say anything about the Lakers today. Have a good day, everybody.